Welcome to the Calm Analytics channel. Boris Teisenghausen is here with you. Today is June 8th, and here are the main news stories at this moment. Last night, a strike was carried out on one of the most important sources of funding for Putin's war. In Novorossiysk, after a nighttime attack by Ukrainian drones, the Grushevaya oil depot is once again on fire, and this is essentially the most important, if not the main part of Putin's war chest. This is one of the largest oil transshipment facilities in southern Russia and the main tank farm of the Chongar oil terminal complex. Several explosions, a massive fire. The total capacity of the tank farm exceeds 1 million cubic meters. There are about 40 tanks on the premises, each with a capacity ranging from 5 to 50,000 cubic meters. It is from here that oil is delivered through a mountain tunnel to the port for loading onto export tankers. According to local residents, during the attack several dozen explosions were heard, after which a massive fire broke out at the oil depot. Local authorities even used the word fire, not smoke or popping sounds, but specifically fire. They report that 140 people and 40 pieces of equipment are working to extinguish the fire. Let me remind you, this facility was recently attacked, and today, Madhya reported that this strike took into account the previous targeting. This is a critically important facility for Putin. To understand the scale of the target, you need to understand the architecture of this facility. That is, Grushevaya Balka and Chongar are not two separate facilities, but a single system. It's simply divided by a mountain ridge. In other words, oil from several Russian main pipelines flows into this Grushevaya oil depot, plus it is delivered by rail, and then from this oil depot it is pumped down through a tunnel to the port, and from there, through Chongar, it is exported. By the way, this tunnel was personally inaugurated by Putin back in 2015. It's burning, blazing, just the way you like it. By the way, friends, don't forget to subscribe to this channel. It's important. You can do it right now. It helps promote the channel, and let's fight Putin's propaganda together. So make sure to subscribe. So it turns out that Ukraine is carrying out a multi-level campaign to choke off fuel supplies to the Russian south. So far, only the south. That is, at the top level, there are strikes on production infrastructure, storage facilities, oil refineries, and tank farms. The middle level is the destruction of logistical hubs, ferries in the Kerch Strait, routes through the occupied territories. And at the lowest level, there are direct strikes, burning fuel trucks on the M14 highway, and not just there. So our drones are operating on all three levels. The result is not just a temporary shortage, but a systemic collapse of the supply chain. That's excellent. And there's a special irony in the fact that the land corridor to Crimea was considered Putin's main territorial trophy. Remember, someone once asked him, "So what are the achievements?" And Putin giggled in that nasty way and said, "Well, now the Sea of Azov is an internal sea of the Russian Federation. That means now there's a land corridor to Crimea." So what was considered a trophy? For the sake of this trophy, let me remind you, Russia suffered colossal losses in Mariupol, in the Kherson region, and in the end, this trophy turned out to be nothing more than a trap. Release the balding substance again, let him shout once more that he was deceived. Here, as they say, shout or don't shout, it won't help. You picked the wrong country to mess with. And in every episode, we have an important fundraiser for the defense forces of Ukraine. Today, we continue raising funds for the first separate medical battalion, specifically for ventilators, which are catastrophically lacking right now at the front for advanced surgical teams. Our medics have recorded a video message for you. Please take a look.
Апарат штучної вентиляції легень – це не просто медичне обладнання, це шанс на порятунок та життя для пацієнта. В умовах бойових дій, де потік поранених часто є раптовим і непередбачуваним, таких апаратів потрібно дуже багато. До того ж, вони мають властивість ламатися та виходити з ладу від високого навантаження. Разом із каналом Бориса Тейзенгаузена ми вже зібрали на 4 таких апарати, але цього все ще недостатньо для передових хірургічних груп нашого підрозділу. Тому ми оголошуємо збір ще на 2 апарати. Ми щиро дякуємо Борису та його глядачам за допомогу, небайдужість і увагу до питань порятунку українських захисників.
Let's help our combat medics. In this case, your donation saves the lives of our defenders. The link to the fundraiser is in the description of this video. There are mono, private, and PayPal options for those who want to help from abroad. If you're watching on another channel somewhere, there's always a QR code which also leads to the fundraiser. And we only need a little bit more to close this fundraiser. Just a little bit more. And in every episode, I personally thank you, as well as on behalf of the hundreds of our defenders whom you have already helped. Thank you so much. Remember, together we are a great force. For the second day in a row, there have been delays at Sochi airport. Problems seem to have hit Russians, flights are being delayed somehow. Thousands of Russians can't fly home. Why they even flew to Sochi in the first place is unclear. In Adler, Russians are taking photos in front of pickup trucks with machine guns from mobile fire groups right on the promenade. Some are complaining about oil sludge in Anapa. Air defense is operating. Vacationers are fleeing the beach in droves. Explosions. Well, in general, there's a lot going on, just like Putin promised. The only nuance is that he hasn't shown up in Sochi for a long time. He's sitting somewhere in his bunker, but Russians aren't so lucky. They're forced to deal with all of this. Well, you know who to thank for this, Russians. Last night, the Krasnoarmeyskaya main pumping station in the Saratov region and the Krasny Yar main station in the Volgograd region were also under attack. That is, both stations are part of the Transneft structure. By the way, Russians have started recording videos by the hundreds for some reason, standing in lines at gas stations and asking, "What's going on? What's going on? Here I am, standing for 3 hours. There's no gasoline. I've been waiting for 5 hours. What's going on? What's going on?" So what is actually happening? Maybe someone will tell them. Well, of course. And there's a very interesting situation with gasoline. In Crimea, gasoline has practically run out, so the population of occupied Crimea has headed across the Crimean Bridge to the nearest settlement where there is still gasoline, at least for now. That's Taman. The gasoline pilgrims brought with them a huge number of canisters, brought all their relatives along, because gasoline is now being distributed in limited quantities per person. That's why they brought entire families with them. Give him some and him too. The local residents in Taman were just a bit stunned when they saw these gigantic lines at their gas stations. Now, for the local residents in Taman to get gas, they have to stand in line the whole day because people have come from Crimea. And of course, they've come to hate these gasoline pilgrims who are now going to suck all the gas out of Taman, and then the residents of Taman themselves will have to go somewhere else to stock up on gasoline. And there's less and less gasoline all across Russia. Oil refineries are shutting down. There is oil, but they can't turn it into gasoline because the refineries are shutting down. Just last month alone, processing dropped by 13%, and the unprocessed oil, which wasn't turned into gasoline or diesel, has to be disposed of somewhere. That's why they're filling up all available storage facilities, hoping that soon these refineries will suddenly start working again and they'll be able to process this oil into fuel. But the refineries won't start working again. What's more, even more refineries are being put out of commission by our drones, thanks to the drones and those who operate them. And here's where a very, very interesting point arises. All the oil depots and storage facilities are practically filled to the brim already, so whichever tank a Ukrainian drone hits, it's bound to set everything on fire, every single tank filled to capacity. That's exactly why oil depots and storage facilities burn so brightly. And since Ukraine is launching more and more drones, they're hitting more and more targets, and it's only going to get worse. There will be less gasoline, the shortage will be catastrophic. In other words, it's only going to get worse. And the population of occupied Crimea should understand that soon there will be no gasoline in Taman, nor in Temryuk, nor in Krasnodar, nor in Sochi, nor in Novorossiysk. The entire south will be left without gasoline. And as for the Russian southern grouping, which will be left without fuel, I think there's no need to explain what that means. They won't be able not only to refuel, but also to deliver ammunition and reinforcements. In other words, gasoline and diesel are needed not just to refuel tanks or APCs, that is, even to simply refuel generators for drone operators' positions, you also need fuel. By the way, I've noticed, and I think you have too, that no one says things like "don't make us laugh," our Iskanders, or "now, even if stones fall from the sky." So what's up with that, huh? Why has everyone gone quiet about the stones from the sky? Drones falling from the sky instead of stones didn't turn out to be all that funny, did they? That's what happens when your country is run by a crazy, botoxed, senile man. And literally, an hour before recording this episode, news came out that in Novorossiysk, just like it happened recently in Tuapse, black rain started to fall, or black snow, if you prefer, made of soot, whatever you prefer. We like it all. Another piece of news, or rather, another confirmation of the so-called genius of our underground geopolitical strategists. Basically, the high-heeled one has messed up everything again. No matter how hard the Russian Federation tried to influence the elections in Armenia, no matter how much they tried to push their pro-Russian candidates, no matter how much effort they put into bringing in people to vote, it was all in vain. They failed just like they did in Hungary, in Moldova, and in Romania. That's how it is. In the new convocation of Armenia's parliament, Pashinyan's Civil Contract Party has secured a confident majority. True, they haven't reached a constitutional majority, but I think they'll sort that out. I congratulate Nikol Pashinyan, congratulate the representatives of his party, and congratulate the citizens of Armenia on their civilizational choice. By the way, Russia has already commented on this. Get ready, fasten your seatbelts. The elections in Armenia took place under unprecedented pressure on the opposition and interference from the West. This was stated by Maria Zakharova. Of all people, as the saying goes, she should be the last to talk. Let me just remind you that during his own pseudo-elections, Putin removed the only pseudo-opposition candidate from the race and didn't allow him to participate at all. Although with Putin, well, I think they can just make up any number they want. It's hard to even call that an election. I think today Zakharova and Medvedev will go way over their limit with the drinks. Another failure. By the way, who in the Kremlin is responsible for elections abroad? Kiriyenko? This is definitely a double agent. Can anyone name me at least one geopolitical victory of Putin's since the full-scale invasion of Ukraine? Well, at least one. So, look, Kabayev has lost Syria, Venezuela, Hungary, Romania, Moldova. Finland and Sweden joined NATO, Armenia and Azerbaijan waved goodbye. The Central Asian states have gone under China's umbrella. Russia itself has fallen into a crippling dependence on China. And what do we get in return? Where are the victories? Now even Cuba is slipping away too. And what do we get in return? What we end up with is strategic cooperation with the Taliban and North Korea. Wow, that's something. Well done, Putin. And here are the first results of the increased logistical difficulties for Russians in the south. Russians are hastily evacuating their troops from the Kinburn Spit. This is being reported by the Atesh partisans. The Spit remains the only occupied part of the Mykolaiv region. By land, it is connected to the left bank of the Kherson region. In general, the delivery of ammunition, fuel, and food to the Spit has completely stopped. Moreover, the personnel of the 337th Regiment suffered significant losses there. And this became another reason for the withdrawal of Russian troops from there. As a result, only remnants of Russian units remain on the Spit, and they are no longer able to hold the defense. At the same time, the logistics system in this area has completely collapsed. Control over the Kinburn Spit could allow the armed forces of Ukraine to weaken Russian strikes along the Black Sea coast, increase our naval activity in this area, and potentially carry out operations to cross to the left bank of the Kherson region. Putin, who talks about Crimea being an unsinkable aircraft carrier, probably didn't study history well or was not attentive when he did. In almost every war in the past, the Crimean peninsula turned out to be a trap for those who defended it. In other words, the history of Crimea is the history of the same trap repeating itself. In 1856, the British cut off Sevastopol from the sea. At that time, Russia surrendered the city and scuttled its own fleet. In 1920, Wrangel held Crimea as his last stronghold until the Reds crossed the Sivash. Back then, his army of 150,000 barely managed to escape through the ports. And in 1942, Soviet troops defended Sevastopol but were destroyed when the Germans cut off sea supplies, took Perikop, and effectively isolated the peninsula. Then, in 1944, the German 17th Army suffered literally the same fate, word for word. They were surrounded, panic broke out, and there were 100,000 losses in just a few weeks. That is, in his study of history, Putin probably hasn't gotten to these pages yet. He's still stuck somewhere with the Pechenegs and the Polovtsians. Another important piece of news. Today, a locomotive of a train convoy was hit in Crimea, not far from the village of Gvardeyskoye. Railway traffic in Crimea has been halted due to this incident. So, the rather dim-witted representative of the occupation authorities, Aksionov, immediately rushed to claim that it was actually a passenger train from Moscow to Simferopol, and so on. But the section of the track where, Soon, by the way, there will be video and many will see what kind of passenger train it really was. The section of the railway has been cordoned off. Civilians are not being allowed in there. There isn't not a single video from this so-called passenger train. Moreover, according to Aksionov, all the passengers were supposedly taken off the train cars. None of the passengers were injured. They were taken off all the train cars, transferred to buses, and taken somewhere. There isn't a single video with suitcases, not a single thing from any passenger. When Russia attacks civilian trains in Ukraine, a lot of videos immediately appear. Unfortunately, this happens regularly, everyone knows it. But here it's a mysterious train convoy. So what was in that train convoy? Well, our intelligence officers say they'll show a video soon. I think in the next episode we'll definitely take a look. There's just some kind of mystery here. Well, the locomotive itself isn't what's important here. The locomotive can be replaced. What's important is something else. Crimea relies on several supply lines. That is, the Crimean Bridge, the railroad, Chongar, which has been blocked, the land corridor through the Azov region, and sea transport. And now, systematic work has begun on all these routes at the same time. But when they start working on all of them at once, expect a cascading collapse and major problems. And here's another piece of news from the Russian Federation. The Russian authorities decided not to introduce a tax on smartphones and laptops before the State Duma elections. That was their idea. Remember that fairy tale about Cepolino? There was a tax on air there. Who was it, Prince Lemon, who was going to introduce a tax on air? So the government decided not to introduce a tax on smartphones and laptops before the State Duma elections. But they will start collecting this tax not from September 1st, but from December 1st. That is, after the State Duma elections. Just so you understand, they simply want to collect some kind of tax from smartphones and laptops and direct it. Where do you think? For the development of the Russian electronics industry. What are they going to, what kind of Russian electronics are we talking about? Some kind of Chinese smartphones with Russian labels stuck on them. What kind of Russian electronics will that be? Here's another interesting point. All unpopular measures, things like additional taxes, tightening the screws, shutting down the internet, and so on and so forth, are postponed until after the State Duma elections. So can you imagine what will happen in Russia after the State Duma elections? How they'll hit Russians with new taxes? Hey, but really, what am I even talking about? What State Duma elections? It's just laughable. And here's another piece of good news. It turns out an unusual drone hit the Chongar Bridge. Or rather, unusual drones. This drone is called Behemoth. Its warhead weighs 75 kilograms and its flight range is 300 kilometers. This is a very, very serious drone. In other words, these drones simply pierced through the deck of the Chongar Bridge. Well, I hope that very soon a behemoth like this, or not even a behemoth, but a behemonster with a much larger warhead, will hit the Crimean Bridge as well and just smash it down to quarks. What do you think the southern group of Russians and those who have moved to Crimea will do then? Swim across? Well, for now, they still have that option. For now, they do. And you, take care of yourselves and your loved ones. Subscribe to this channel, don't forget. And let's help our combat medics, our guardian angels. The link to the fundraiser is in the description of this video. Have a peaceful day, everyone, and glory to Ukraine.